Where do we begin with Mr. Mountbatten Windsor? I mean, first of all, I had heard that there's been all sorts of accoutrements and equipment reported by people who were cleaning up after one of his shooting parties at Sandringham. Tell us more about that.
I just think that he's a revolting man, and I just think that it's appalling. Everything about him actually makes me shiver. And I think that he's the most appalling man to have all the amazing things he's had as being part of the royal family, and yet to behave in the most disgusting way that makes you feel sick.
What about this idea that he might take up the offer of a palace over in the UAE, 16,000 square foot? The Emirates billionaire ruler of Abu Dhabi has said, look, he can come and live his life out here instead. I mean, talk about landing on your feet. My question would be this. Would that not expose the country and the royal family to potential bribery and coercion? You're sending good old Handy Andy over to hang out with influencers and oligarchs on the yachts of Abu Dhabi. What could go wrong?
It's terrible. I mean, he's got proper people who cook for him because he's never cooked for himself, and it's heavily guarded, and they don't really care very much about women. So if he does go there, he'll be very badly behaved, I'm quite sure.
I mean, it'd be a risk. In my mind, this is going to be a risk to national security, because if anything was taking place inside those palace walls, and given his reputation, the minute he's got a sniff of the high life again with a load of sort of, you know, pouty, surgically enhanced beauties who are all out there to try and nab a rich man, and all of the sort of Russian oligarchs bobbing around on their boats, all the sort of strange shifting of dark money that goes on in the UAE, why would you put the ex-prince somewhere like that? Because surely it'd be very easy then for people to take photographs, videos, to get compromat on him, essentially, to yet again shame the royal family and put us as a nation in a very precarious position.
Well, very much so. But also Chinese, they would do the same. It'd be all just dreadful. But I think he would do that because he doesn't want to. I mean, he's got this peculiar way of saying, I'm doing everything to help and be help, you know, I'm so good, I'm so responsible, but he's actually vile. And if he does go, I wonder if he'd start really attacking the royal family and being able to do the most appalling arrangements. And he'd be very rich. Now, there's King Charles, who's going to give him a home and give him money so that he can actually eat and have a decent life. But actually, in reality, if he gets the money from the king and there's money from him moving from his mansion, he'll be extremely rich. And if he goes down there, he'll have money galore. And I think he can't be allowed to go, but I don't know how you stop him.
Well, there must be a way to stop him, surely. I mean, I just think it would be utterly unconscionable if he suddenly winds up in a palace in the UAE. I think it would be a great danger to the country. But the man is showing absolutely no contrition. Not only are we now faced with the prospect of him essentially being bankrolled to the tune of millions, despite being a ne'er-do-well and having shown absolutely no remorse for his activity, we learn as well that over the course of time, when the palace were putting out various statements that were then sent to him for approval, he was removing references to things like the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes in statements. We learned that the Queen expressed concerns that her son's association with Epstein compromised her work with abuse victims, the same of the Duchess of Edinburgh. I mean, this cretin, for want of a better word, has cast a very long shadow over our monarchy.
Yes, I mean, but actually I think it's very good for both the Queen and the Duchess of Edinburgh, because they know how women have suffered, and that's what they spend a lot of time doing. Now, they will, I'm sure, get help to get rid of his ways of behaving with women, and that they will look up who have been very badly treated and then help them. I mean, there have been people with no money and actually ruined by this man And I think that they need to actually help them. And that's why they're saying this, because they can't do that if, for Camilla, her husband's brother is behaving so badly. You can't do any of the things that you need to do to look after women and men even who've been attacked, and do it that way. I think it's too scary to even think about, but I'm sure now that King Charles is so furious and so strong about it all. He's stopped being kind.
I mean, look, I'm glad he's taken decisive action. I don't think this is the end of the story, however. Crying out loud! I thought prison was supposed to be a form of punishment. On top of that, we also learned that a quarter of jailed foreign sex offenders come from just 5 countries alone. That's according to the first analysis of prisoner crimes by nationality. Romania, Pakistan, Poland, Ireland and India account for 457 of the foreign sex offenders in prisons in England and Wales. That's down to Ministry of Justice data obtained through Freedom of Information by The Telegraph. That's 1 in 4 of the record 1,700 foreign sex offenders in prison from June. 9.9% increase. Let's speak now to David Shipley, former prisoner, writer and researcher on prison and justice issues. David, let's start off first of all with those toe rags making their little bragging videos on social media from inside prison. How are they getting away with that? How are they doing that?
Well, I think this is one of those cases where, because something's high profile, it reveals how disastrously bad our prisons are. So just as we had Hadish Kabatu being released by mistake, and then we learn that hundreds of men get released by mistake every year. So with this, we've seen this video because this guy is high profile, because he threatened Nigel Farage. That's why he's in prison. But actually, phones are awash in our prison estate. They're everywhere. They're very easy to get hold of. They're brought in often now by drones, along with drugs and weapons and other contraband. And it's very, very common. If you go on social media, you can find a huge number of videos made by prisoners in prisons, often within their cells, in exactly this way. It's a systemic problem.
I mean, is there any sort of punishment if these prisoners are caught? I mean, this guy clearly is on news headlines today. Everyone knows he's got hold of a phone and has been making his content. Is he going to face, from your experience, any sort of extra rap as a result of that?
Well, the prison service did go and search him and search his cell on Saturday night, but they couldn't find the phone. So they, as far as I understand it, won't actually have charged him with anything.
So hold on, they can't find the actual physical phone, but the video's there, right? He's clearly been using a phone.
I would find that convincing evidence, yeah. But the issue as well is that a lot of the time, men will get caught with contraband. In theory, they can be given extra days in their sentence. Sometimes even they could be charged with an additional crime. But often it doesn't happen. Often what actually happens is they'll get the contraband taken off them. They'll be put on what's called basics. So they might get their TV taken away for a bit and be able to spend less money on canteen each week. But that's it. There aren't really any meaningful consequences a lot of the time.
Do you know, I always hear split opinions on whether prison is tough enough. There's a school of thought that says, no, it's not. Certainly our little mate with the AK-47 on his cheek, who seems to have found a partner in crime, seems to be having the time of his life. He doesn't seem too distressed at his standard of living while inside at His Majesty's pleasure. Other people say, yeah, you don't want to go to prison. No one wants to go to prison. It's actually pretty horrific. Which one is it?
I think it's kind of neither. It's very rubbish in that it's a lot of wasted time, a lot of sitting in the cell doing nothing. You know, most prisoners are locked up for 22 hours a day. But if we wanted a really punishing system, we'd get everyone doing hard labour. Right? It's not particularly punishing, but it's also not particularly getting prisoners to do useful stuff with their time, which means they'll be less likely to offend after release. It's not working on teaching good values. And that's one of the big things as well. You see it with this phone stuff. The prison system should be teaching people in prison to obey the rules and to be pro-social, not anti-social. But in fact, often they'll find that if they break the rules, not much happens. They're not allowed to...
Would you advocate, therefore, because I've often thought, it seems crazy to me that we import a lot of foreign labour for the jobs British people apparently don't want to do, whether it's picking fruit or cleaning public toilets. Would you sort of advocate something similar to chain gangs then for certain offenders? Actually, if you want to have certain privileges, you've got to go out, roll up your sleeves and get on with doing a job that benefits society, but in a sort of format that is made secure.
I wouldn't advocate chain gangs per se, but I think when prisoners are safe and it can be managed safely, getting them to go out every day and work and pay taxes is a great thing. We do that in open prisons. I'd probably look at more for less safe prisoners, something like the military do at Colchester, which is their military corrective training centre, or effectively their prison. And there, every day prisoners have to do hours of PT. They'll also get very specific bespoke programs. If they've got addiction issues or violence issues, they'll work on those. They'll get training. They'll get skills workshops. They'll get prepared for release every day in a way which actually works, because they only have a reoffending rate of 9%. So I think we should demand a lot more of prisoners. Leaving them in their cells to smoke drugs and make TikTok videos is disastrous.
What can we do about this drone situation, David? Because, you know, I've heard about this a lot before, that all sorts of contraband is getting into prison via drones. How easy is it to actually find something that might block drones from operating, or that might create some sort of extra high fencing that, I don't know if that's possible, they'd probably still be able to fly over the top. Is this something that we can address with certain resources and extra equipment?
There is. I mean, there's a thing called essentially anti-helicopter netting, it's called, which is you put over to block drones. In many cases, prisons haven't put that in place. They haven't got bars over the windows, which means drones can fly up to cell windows to make deliveries. There's also counter-UAS, counter-drone vulnerability assessment, which all prisons are supposed to have done. And according to the FOIs I've seen in many areas, 2/3 of prisons haven't even done those. We're getting more and more drones flying. It's been called by the Chief Inspector of Prisons a national security threat. And it is, because weapons have been brought into prisons, not just drugs, not just phones, actual weapons. And the Ministry of Justice is just not taking it seriously enough. There's no centralized program of actually working out where these drones are coming from, interdicting them, examining the data on them, and going after the operators. It really, really lacks, and it's not good enough.
One would think that counter-helicopter netting isn't going to cost the universe. Surely that could be something that most prisons could afford to put in place.
It is, and there's budget for it. I think really it's a failure of leadership. I mean, you've got to remember, this is a prison service that regularly releases people by mistake, or holds people past their lawful release date. Or in many cases, we see prison inspections where they don't know where prisoners are in the jail at any given time in a day. The level of competence in the prison system is so low, you really have to see it to believe it. It is an astonishingly broken system. And yes, it should be simple enough to put up some netting, to run night patrols, to interdict drones, basic stuff, but they are not doing it consistently and at scale. And that is creating huge harm within jails.
Looking at the latest figures obtained by the Telegraph under Freedom of Information into foreign sex offenders, it doesn't surprise me. But it turns out that a quarter of jailed foreign sex offenders are from just 5 countries. When you look at some of the statistics, that, you know, certain foreign offenders in prison, certain nationalities of foreign offenders, it seems to me their primary crime is sexual offences. I mean, this to me shows a significant breakdown in society if foreign men are coming into this country and committing sex crimes against the women of this nation. Do you think that this is a substantial change from previous years?
Well, it is, and it's getting worse because we are continuing to import very large numbers of men from countries which we know those men are likely to be much more likely to be sexual offenders or violent. So it's a choice. And I think you're right. So I think like Bangladeshis, 40% of Bangladeshis in our prisons are there for sexual offences, for example. And what we need to start doing is being realistic about the fact that not all nationalities are the same. You know, and we have a migration policy which refuses to recognise that reality. And in fact, we shouldn't be letting in lots of men from countries like Bangladesh, like Eritrea, like Afghanistan, where we know there are these high levels of criminality. They're very likely to attack women. They're very likely to be violent. It's a profoundly self-harming policy, and it is a crime, I would say, being committed by the political class of this country against the people, especially the women and children of this country.
I mean, what about when we get to organised crime? Because certainly the data on that is something that's fascinated me for a long period of time. I know that the underground illicit drugs industry in this country has been dominated by Albanians. In fact, they dominate most of the trafficking, be it sex trafficking, arms trafficking, drug trafficking. We know that Vietnamese and Chinese gangs run a lot of the cannabis farms in this country. Why on earth, I mean, are we not looking at this data and the government saying, right, given that a disproportionate percentage of Albanians Albanians have come to the UK are actually coming here to commit the worst form of serious and organised crime. We're not going to let anybody else in from Albania until this gets sorted out.
Yeah, I entirely agree. It would be a very sensible policy choice. That's, I think, we need to start doing. And the other issue, of course, is the reason we have these massive foreign organised crime networks in our country is partly because our borders are so porous. And, you know, if organised crime groups want to bring people over, they can just bring them over on the small boats. They don't even have to formally enter the country. So it's a ridiculous system. It makes no sense. It's directly harmful to this country.
I cannot believe this. I mean, I can. Part of me can believe that it would come to pass, that there are editors at the BBC who have, in their mind's eye, they feel like it's their public duty to pillory Donald Trump, to publicly crucify him. But let's look at the clip again, because doctoring actuality to this extent, and I was BBC trained, doctoring it to this extent, it just breaches every sort of moral and broadcasting code in the book. Let's watch.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
I mean, there is a big difference between someone giving opinion, like I often do, such as the BBC should probably have a long, hard look in the mirror and question whether it should even exist, and actually what this is, which is a deliberate falsification, a deliberate fabrication of actuality. What do you think should be the consequences of this?
I've been calling to defund the BBC. I was part of that original campaign years ago, Alex. It should not have taxpayer-funded money. If they want to be impartial, you know, pay for it themselves. And you cannot have a state broadcaster, though, with such bias, but they've got away with it for too long. So really, the bar's low, they get away with it. But we've seen it I've seen it in even local media where they, and also national media, where they just clip certain bits and take things out of context, just to do headline grabbing and don't actually put the full context. This has gone on for too long. It's not actually, I don't think it's a fair type of publication, really, in broadcasting, do you? And no wonder that especially regarding the BBC, no wonder that the public, a lot are failing to pay their the BBC licence. I don't actually blame them. And you'd like to see
it gone altogether, the licence?
Oh, of course I would, yeah, completely.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I've got a slightly different opinion on the BBC, and we won't bother getting too much into that. I actually think that having a public broadcaster is a great asset as a nation. Lots of other countries want it, but there is something very wrong with the BBC that we need to change. I would say we have to absolutely cut into smithereens the licence fee, but hold the BBC far more accountable, and no taxation without representation. But looking at accountability, I think that, I mean, if Donald Trump decides to bring a suit against the BBC, given that this content on BBC World is probably also broadcast in America, there would be grounds for this to happen. And in the United Kingdom, there are caps on how much you can get from a defamation case. In America, no such thing when it comes to damages. But my problem with this is if he does go after the BBC, it will be the likes of anybody who owns a television set and wishes to use it to watch any programming live, that they will have to pay. I actually personally believe that the editors and the directors of this content should be held personally liable. Yes. They should be sacked, and when that defamation case comes, they should be the ones to have to scrimp and save and pay their way out of this.
Yeah, I completely agree, because it'd be the taxpayers footing the bill otherwise, wouldn't it? Which is wrong. They didn't call for this. Yeah, there's got to be some accountability, but you've also got to, you know, the person at the top who's allowed this culture to carry on. I mean, I refused to do Newsnight anymore after it was like 4 against 1. It was just like an aggressive pile-on. You've been on shows as well, haven't you, Alex, and seen that? I mean, look at the question time audience. They'll probably pick every lefty in the country, put them in that room. It's never balanced, is it?
Have you ever noticed, Andrea? Because, you know, as you said, I've been on various programmes before, whether it's Politics Live, Newsnight, Question Time, any questions. One thing I know, as soon as I turn up in the studio, I know exactly which seat is going to be mine on a panel, because they always sit me at the very far right. They always put me right on the edge, as if to say, oh, these are the nice normal people. That's the lunatic there in the corner. Little things like that.
Well, do you know what was funny, actually? Yeah. Any Questions was in Gainsborough, which is obviously in Lincolnshire, and I got a really good vote share in Gainsborough. But when I walked through the audience to sit down, and I was smiling, and I got glared at, and I thought, this must, you know, I got a good vote there. I didn't even get one person smiling or, you know, or being positive. So I do think things are hand-selected.
Oh, no, I mean, I think what the problem is, people have to state the way they voted in order to get into an audience, but the left-wing are very good at scheming and lying and coordinating. And I think people deliberately say, I voted Reform, knowing full well they didn't, in order that they can boo and jeer. Isabel Oakeshott, fearless journalist. One of the best in the biz. That's why we keep her and no one else has her. Good morning to you, Isabel. Now, you've done an absolutely extraordinary interview with a former migrant hotel manager who was arrested by 10 riot cops storming his home because apparently he took a 77p bowl of pasta. What on earth?
I mean, we're laughing here, but it was anything but funny for the young man concerned, Adam, who gave us his story exclusively on Talk. And now Adam worked for a couple of years inside a migrant hotel, and he actually quite enjoyed the job. He's a very measured young man. He's not what Keir Starmer would like to dismiss as some far-right thug, not a bit of it. But over the time that he was working inside that migrant hotel, he became increasingly disillusioned and frankly quite shocked by some of what he saw. He liked some of the clients there, or service users as they were known, but I'm afraid many of the others were not very grateful for the generosity of the British taxpayer. They would trash their rooms, they would hold hunger strikes because they didn't think the food was good enough. This was catering that I think most people would be pretty happy with, especially given that it was free. And indeed, he tells a story of how one of the other workers in the hotel, single mum, struggling to put food on the table, asked for permission to take the leftovers from that catering home in a Tupperware box, but apparently it wasn't good enough for many of the migrants who staged not one but two sit-down protests. They wouldn't eat the food because it wasn't up to their standards. And they were fighting quite a lot of the time. He's shared with me CCTV footage of that, and I think Talk will be showing that at a future date. And when he left the migrant hotel, he decided that he needed to expose some of this, because after all, the government goes out of its way, really does go out of its way to stop us, the taxpayer, from seeing inside those hotels. We know that the asylum seekers are getting a pretty good deal, but we don't really get to see how they behave. And he thought it was high time that people did see this. So he decided to conduct his own little expose, acting as a citizen journalist, and did some undercover recording, actually not so much in his old place of work, because that had closed down, but he slipped into 2 or 3 other migrant hotels, something that he says was easy for him because, as he puts it, he's brown. He is a person of mixed heritage, and he was able just to sort of saunter in, which I think it's fair to say, Alex, you and I perhaps wouldn't be able to do. And after slipping into these hotels, he recorded some undercover footage, and he sat down and enjoyed some pasta with some of the guests at one of these hotels. And next thing he knows, there are 10 riot police at his door, banging on the door, barging in, terrifying his poor elderly mother who's disabled. and demanding to take his mobile phone, to take his electronic devices, turning the house upside down and arresting him. Now, what were they arresting him for? Well, apparently burglary. He is accused of burgling a bowl of pasta and perhaps other food from the migrant hotels where he briefly went in to expose what goes on. Now, the value of that pasta that he thinks he's being accused of stealing, he has worked out, because he saw a lot of the catering kind of costs and the way it all works. He's worked out the value of that bowl of pasta is an enormous 77 pence. So how is it that was worth the time of even one policeman, never mind 10 officers in riot gear? What an absolute joke.
I mean, it's scary. It is dystopian. Now, you've done a brilliant sit-down interview of him. We have pulled together some clips from that. Let's have a little watch.
I see 10 police officers on my drive in... 10 police officers.
Are you sure? 10?
The CCTV doesn't lie. 10 police officers in full riot gear. So I ran downstairs, opened the door. I was like, is everything okay? They barged through and he says, are you Adam? And I said, yes. And they said, you're under arrest for burglary. I said, burglary? I said, never burgled anything in my life. And the accusation was taking some chicken pasta and not paying for it.
Was there a possibility to pay for it?
So there's no possibility to pay, no tills, nobody asking for money. I've ran the numbers through AI of how much it would cost with serving it for 300 people, and they said it would be about 77p.
I mean, let's call it what it is, Isabel, that this isn't about the pasta. This is using armed riot police like that and storming his home is deliberate state intimidation.
That is exactly what it is, and it really beggars belief that the state, the machinery of the state, is being used in this way. And you have to ask, what is it that the government is afraid of? Now, this will have been that police force's individual, in my view, absolutely extraordinary misjudgment. But unfortunately, we're seeing instances like this across the country, and that can only come from on high. Pressure on the machinery of the state, on the legal powers that be, on our criminal justice system, to shut down anything to do with the asylum seeker debate. They do not want citizen journalists, or indeed sometimes professional, well-known journalists. I'm thinking of Alison Pearson of The Telegraph here. They do not want people exposing uncomfortable truths or saying things that are a little bit awkward. And, you know, I wonder whether they thought that this young man was some kind of soft target, because he's not well known. He doesn't have a newspaper behind him. He doesn't have a radio station behind him. He's just a young man who got really disillusioned with the abuse of taxpayers' money and the appalling behaviour of some of the asylum seekers who are in this country, basically broke into Britain and were living completely free at the expense of the British taxpayer. And his crime was to try to shed some light on that. And I don't think any of our listeners, our viewers, would think that that was worthy of even one police officer. You know, he might have perhaps expected a visit from a community officer saying, you know what, maybe this isn't the way to go about it. You know, there are reasons why perhaps a different approach would be better. And I'm sure he's so law-abiding. You know, he told me that he's never so much as, I don't think, had any penalty points on his driving licence. I'm sure that if he just had a visit from a community officer who asked what he was trying to achieve and had a nice chat, that would have been the end of it. So what on earth are our authorities doing, using limited resources in this fashion? I mean, I think we all know shoplifting is absolutely rife, and I've never seen an armed response, you know, a riot police response to someone stealing a can of beans. Have you?
No, well, it is state intimidation, and it's a very, very dark day when we look at Britain. We realise that that is where we have got to, but we knew it anyway a long time ago. Isabel, fantastic journalism as ever, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else that comes out of that interview as this station exclusively continues continues to play your brilliant content. Let's speak now to Lord Clive Soley, who is a Labour peer. Clive, welcome to the programme. It seemed to me that Rachel Reeves, when she was quizzed afterwards, being asked questions by journalists about whether this would mean putting up income tax, she didn't answer it, which normally in politics means I don't want to give you the answer because the general public won't like the sound of it. Do you think I'm onto something?
I think it also means, I mean, there's an element of truth in what you said, but it's also true that you're not going to start talking about a budget when you haven't made the decisions yet. So that's sensible. What she was doing this morning is two things, and they're both very important. The first one was sending a clear message to the markets that the borrowing rules aren't going to change, because that's what's brought stability to the British economy in the last year or so. So that was an important message, and the markets and the various business organisations will welcome that. The second one, which you're indicating, is there is likely to be increased taxes, although I think you'll have to be a bit careful of this because you might find it's about major changes in taxes. One of the most interesting things being floated at the moment is a small cut in the national insurance rate and an increase in standard rate tax, because that would not hit people on lower incomes. So, there are arguments around it which are much more complex, but I'd be surprised if there isn't more tax. Because the other thing I'd say that you need to focus on too, I was a bit concerned when you gave your little list of things of what was wrong with the British economy. There's two big ones you didn't mention. One is obviously Ukraine. One of the last speeches I made in the House of Lords in November 2017 pointed out that we needed to increase our defence expenditure to about 3% if we were to avoid another major war in Europe. And I don't always agree with Donald Trump, but he's absolutely right in saying that the United States should not be bearing the defence burden which ought to be carried by Europe. But if you want to avoid a major war in Europe, and there is a danger of that, there's a touch of the 1930s about our present situation, then we are in Europe going to have to increase defence spending. The other big one, which is you can't do anything about really, is that in the last 20-odd years, China and Asia have become major competitors economically, and because they are behind the curve in terms of some of the services that you get in the West, it's obviously going to be easier for them to outperform the West.
Yeah, I mean, you said those 2 points. It's interesting, actually, with Ukraine. Some people might see it as an advantage if we start increasing defence spending, because it directly invests things like the weapons industry, of which the UK actually has quite a thriving sector in terms of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, so let's do it, but you have to pay for it in the first instance. It only benefits for you when you get those orders coming through. But it is happening.
In terms of China's competitiveness, they have a major advantage that they don't seem to give two hoots about climate change and are building coal-fired power stations while Ed Miliband is running over to Beijing on a regular basis to buy green technology. I mean, surely we're playing into the hands of that unfair advantage.
That's a bit too simplistic, because China actually has made remarkable progress in cutting its emissions, but coal is still a problem there. Also, it is true that the Chinese have not made the advances that have been made in the West over the last almost 200 years, actually. And that means we in the West, not just Britain, this is why we have this problem in France, Germany, United States, the economies are struggling because they can't keep up with that East Asian explosion of economic efficiency and competence. That's a major long-term problem. I mean, I'm not saying that there's an easy answer to it. There's not. All I'm saying is don't deduct the difficult issues. They are there.
I understand the nuance of all of this, but I sometimes wonder if the Labour government understands the nuance of all of this, because we know we're facing economic hardship. We know we're struggling to compete in a globalised world with workforces that cost far less than our own and energy bills that cost far less than our own. So why are we the one country in the developed world who are going hell for leather for net zero, which is going to cost, by the end of the Labour Party's term, £60 billion? When you look at things like the public sector pay rises, that's added an extra £10 billion onto the public purse. Surely these are things, if you were going to be prudent and pragmatic about our economic situation, we're simply not affordable right now.
Well, you're not actually correct in saying we are the only government that's doing it this way. In fact, if you look around the Western world, some have made remarkable progress, not just the West, incidentally. Some developing countries have done far more than we've done. And then if you look individual states, in the United States, even where Trump is bearing down on it, you find that places like California are doing far better than we are, and many others. Why? Because companies and others recognize that climate change is a serious problem, and we've got to deal with it. Now, that's this second part of Rachel Reeves' message that needs to be addressed, really. You know, you're quite right. Taxes will probably, not definitely, but probably go up in some form. She might be able to adjust things in other ways as well. And that is going to happen throughout the Western world. Look at those problems in France at the moment, and you recognise the British economy is in a better place than the French economy. So you sort of saying, oh, it's terrible in Britain. I have to say, I'm proud of what Britain
well, look,
is.
I'm well aware.
Well, I'm not sure that you are. Don't come over that you're proud of Britain. It comes over that you're sort of trying to rubbish it all the time.
Well, no, what I am trying to rubbish is some of the decisions taken by this government that I am paying for, that I am paying through the nose for, when I don't really cost the state anything. And I'll mention two things, shall I, that Rachel Reeves failed to mention this morning, which most of my listeners realise are a huge blight on the country's record of governance and don't feel particularly fair.
What's a blight?
One of them is migration, and the number of people who are foreign-born subsisting off benefits and not working and not contributing to our economy, the cost of illegal immigration into this country, that wasn't mentioned by her at all. And the second one is the huge welfare bill, which of course she did mention last time round. One of the reasons the IMF didn't rubbish our economy is because in theory the welfare bill was going to be in train through Parliament, which of course the Labour backbenchers blocked. She said again that that bill has to come down, but will it be executed? Will your party get behind that?
I think you've got a strong case when you talk about the benefits issue. And the Labour government is struggling with that. On the immigration thing, you need to think this through. 3 years ago, before the Labour government in power, 1 million people came to Britain under the immigration rules of the last government. It is actually dramatically dropping. And what they've got to do, because this will, make people feel much better if you can deal with the boat problem. The boat problem is not a quick fix, and people have learned that now. Even reform is recognising it's not a quick fix. You've got to sort it out in a number of ways, and it is very, very important that it is sorted out.
Well, let's hope it does get sorted out on both of those issues, because the general public are certainly, I think, on the doorstep saying that they are of grave concern.
Well, a nice, calm, pleasant little PMQs there. Peter Cardwell is with me. It looks like James Cartledge got under David Lammy's skin there.
100%. Lammy lost the run of himself at the end there. He was really, really annoyed. He made a number of references to the fact he wasn't up against Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, as he thought he was going to be. He said in 25 years he'd never had such a bad spectacle. And all James Cartledge did over most of his questions, over 6 questions, was A, ask for an apology, which hasn't been delivered to the family of the 14-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted by Hadish Kabatu. And secondly, asking, are there any asylum-seeking migrants who are in prison who've been released by mistake? We know that in a year, under Labour's watch, 262 people have been released. So this was calm, it was measured, it was controlled from James Cartledge. Someone who wasn't calm, someone who wasn't measured, someone who wasn't controlled, and someone who wasn't wearing a poppy was David Lammy.
Yeah, one of our callers, Jason in Lincoln. Calamity Lammy currently answering PMQs, the only one not wearing a poppy. But what was David Lammy's answer there? Is it that he didn't know?
He doesn't know.
Or is it that he knows and he doesn't want to say?
No, he doesn't know the answer. He doesn't have it in front of him. And actually, when you're preparing for things like these kind of question and answer sessions, which I prepared ministers for when I was a special advisor, you've always got to think, what are the worst questions that can be asked? What are the hostile questions that can be asked? And clearly, Hadish Kabatu, big justice issue, massive issue for the prison service, huge screw up for the prison service. Clearly, a follow-up from James Cartledge was very likely. James Cartledge, former Justice Minister himself.
Repeatedly followed up.
Exactly.
I mean, is there an argument also that David Lammy doesn't know, and also he doesn't want to say, no, it hasn't happened, because there's also a very high chance that it has.
Yes, there is a high chance that it has.
And he doesn't want to get caught out.
Exactly, and there's one of these people released almost every day. So the question he will then be going to his officials and saying is, why didn't I have that in my briefing pack? Why wasn't I prepared for that question? He's clearly very angry, and interestingly, he talked about the fact that he put up with 14 years of the Conservatives. He said he'd been in the House for 25 years, and really, as time went on, David Lammy just got more and more annoyed. I thought he lost control there, as he sometimes does. He got very angry towards the end, whereas James Cartledge, cool as a cucumber.
We've got Paul Richards on the line, former Labour Party Special Advisor. Hi, Paul. That was a very ill-tempered PMQs by any standards.
Well, hello to you both. I think it was the B team being put in, wasn't it? It wasn't a vintage performance. I disagree with Peter's analysis a little bit. I think that it was a poor performance on both sides, actually, to be absolutely honest. And I'm pretty astonished that James Cartledge used up all of his questions on this one issue, because the Rachel Reeves statements yesterday on tax rises, you might have thought that would be a stronger area for the Tories to go in on, or even the result from New York overnight in the mayoral election, or even the unfolding tragedy in Sudan. There were sort of some very hot button issues going on in the world, and yet he used all of his questions on this one topic, which I think Lammy just sort of went, well, it's your fault. You were a justice minister when these people started being let out, and it meant that it was a bit of a score draw, I would say.
Paul, do you feel that the public get frustrated when they see this, that they see questions being wasted, or do you feel that Lammy should have been held to account? If you're not going to answer a question, it is a bit of a standard procedure to keep asking it until they do.
Well, I think the problem is that it is one of those questions you can't answer, because presumably, in logic, the answer must be yes. There are other cases. I don't know, but that's just the logic of the
So
numbers.
Why didn't he say that?
But he can't say that out loud, because that becomes a big government announcement, and therefore, the Tories have won. So he obfuscates the answer. Then he has to say at the end, well, I've answered the question, when he plainly hasn't. And of course that means that the public are frustrated, because there are so many other issues they probably would like to know the answers to as well. And I mean, I've never liked the gladiatorial style of Prime Minister's questions. It's not very illuminating, and it doesn't show our Parliament. So much of the work of our Parliament is deliberative and collaborative, and this is obviously a clash, which I think makes us all look pretty bad. But I think to use up all six on one topic when there are so many other issues in the world.
Peter's shaking his head. I want to come back to Peter on that.
But it won't be the first time we've disagreed.
Well, it won't be the last. It won't be the last, Paul. But yes, and good to see you wearing a poppy, unlike David Lammy. Paul actually was selling poppies the last time I saw him at Victoria Station, bumped into him, which is great volunteering from Paul. But no, he's wrong. He's wrong, because David Lammy was absolutely right to be questioned on these two issues. And it's two really basic things that go to the heart of his competence as Justice Secretary. Have you apologised to the family of the victim of Hadish Kabati? Well, no, he's done it on the floor of the House. Have you? That didn't happen last week. Has it happened since then? Well, no, it hasn't. He said he's now apologising on the floor of the House. Pick up the phone, man. It's dead easy. Just get in touch with that family. Secondly,
why is that not happening, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a really basic thing to do. Now, politicians need to sort of actively say to officials, I want to do this. It's not something officials, I used to work in the Ministry of Justice, it's not something they will come to you to say, and they don't like really politicians speaking to victims directly, because there is a process. But if I were David Lammy, this is so clear. You're up at PMQs, it's such a clear thing to do. And I mean, the thought that he's going to ask about Mandami and New York, like, that's irrelevant to British politics, I would argue at this point anyway, certainly irrelevant to PMQs. And also, Rachel Reeves did so much damage to herself yesterday that I don't think the Conservatives even needed to ask about that. And all you're going to get from David Lammy if you ask about Rachel Reeves is, well, wait until the budget, we can't speculate. So he knows he's going to get those kind of answers. So this is actually something that James Cartledge went for. Paul says, erroneously, I think, that everybody looked bad. I actually think James Cartledge, in his quite controlled, gentlemanly, almost old school way, just being persistent, actually won for the Tories today. I wasn't expecting him to. James Cartledge isn't a brilliant Commons performer, but actually, in contrast to Lammy, who really lost his temper there, I think James Cartledge comes out of it very well.
Paul, in your former role, would you advise David Lammy to be human, if you like, and pick up the phone to the girl's family?
I mean, I probably would. I think empathy goes an awful long way in politics, and it is about those relationships. Just to point on what Peter said there, though, this is not justice questions. This is Prime Minister's questions, and both are deputising for their leaders, for the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. So to go just purely on justice, I think, was a mistake.
But Cartledge could have gone on defence, though. He could, by that lot, he could have gone on defence. He could have gone on anything. It's not just if he was a Shadow Justice Secretary and went on justice, I would agree with you, Paul. But as a Shadow Defence Secretary, he could have gone on anything.
Well, he should have done. That's my point. He should have ranged across a range of topics.
Why?
Because those are the things that the public want to know. And just to bang on about the same issue when you're not going to get an answer, I think it was a waste of his opportunity. I don't suppose he's going to get asked to do this again, actually.
We should note David Lammy has just put on a poppy, actually, so it was obviously a mistake.
Well, of course it was a mistake. I imagine it must have fallen off on his way to sit down. I mean, he's not a deliberate snub, is it? It's just something that he should have done. Mind you, that's the sort of thing that there's a parliamentary private secretary sitting right behind him, whose job it is to make sure he's got a poppy on. So
but again, it goes back to the absolute basics here. The absolute basics of, have you apologised to the victim's family and potentially to the victim? Do you know what's going on in your department? Do you know what's going on in the prison service, and have they released any others, and how many have been released since Hadish Kabati? And are you wearing a poppy? I mean, those three things are all three really basic things that should have happened today to David Lammy, but yet again he failed.
Paul, final word.
Well, I think he could have been better briefed. I think the poppy thing is obviously just a mistake. It must have fallen off, but I don't think he lost his temper. He's a passionate man. He needs to cross his brief. Absolutely not.
No, he did look to me like he was rattled. Let's put it that way. Let's call it that.
I hate having schadenfreude, but it does put a sort of slight half smile on my face. All those people who invested in electric vehicles, at least part of the reason, apart from what, frankly, because nothing beats a combustion engine, might be that they save money in the long term because you don't have to pay fuel duty. That was until Rachel Reeves came along, because apparently she's decided that it's not fair that only people with combustion engines are paying road taxes when electric vehicles are also using the roads. And so they're going to be faced with a pay per mile tax in the forthcoming budget, 3 pence per mile on top of other road taxes. Let's speak now to Andrew Montford, Director of Net Zero Watch. I mean, look, when it comes to this, Andrew, I sort of think, well, fair play. And I'm sorry if people listening have an electric vehicle and think, well, that's not OK, because I deliberately bought a vehicle that doesn't pollute. The point is, the road tax pays for the maintenance of our roads, and a lot of electric vehicles are far heavier than the standard combustion engined vehicle, are actually therefore responsible for a huge amount of the potholes. And also, without sort of sounding like an inverted snob Marxist, frankly, the people who have bought electric vehicles tend to be top of the food chain and can probably afford to pay more road tax than your average white van man. What do you think to this?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, the EVs are really just a toy for rich people, and this is what the government does. They try to incentivize people to take on these green technologies with subsidies and sort of cost reductions of various kinds, but eventually they have to take them away. So it's not just the EVs. You see this on the heat pumps as well. They'll give you a subsidy for putting in your first heat pump, so it doesn't look quite so much more expensive, but when you come to replace it, there's no more subsidy. So then you get hit with the full whack. So all these people who've been putting in heat pumps for the last 10 years or whatever are going to get a nasty surprise in 10 years' time when they come to replace it. This is sort of standard bait and switch sales technique, isn't it? It's going to, this is really, really cheap. Come and take on the new green technologies, and then, did we say it was cheap? Surely not. The people are going to get nasty surprises in a few years' time. And, what can you say? People need to learn to question what the government tells them. The government will say anything to get its policies through. And if you trust the government too much, well, you'll get a nasty shock.
Especially the cult of net zero. I remember when we were being told we all had to have diesel cars because they were better. Do you remember that? The whole sort of, oh, you know, diesel, it's a much cleaner fuel. And then about, 2 seconds later, well, we've got to get rid of all the diesel cars because they're dreadful, they're carcinogenic. Frankly, EVs are a con. Stick with a combustion engine is my advice. Frank, as well, this whole idea that you're saving the planet, when you look at the amount of CO2 and emissions needed and the use of sort of child slaves in all of the rare earth mineral mines in order to create one of these batteries, it's just, it's a load of baloney.
Yeah, and we're going to get another nasty shock when we have to start recycling EV batteries. That is going to be a horrendously expensive and probably horrendously polluting process as well. And it's a disaster coming.
It is indeed. I'm just waiting for biofuel to hit the market and all the combustion engines will live a long and happy life and the EV will be remembered as fondly as the compact disc. Let's talk now, though, about what Richard Tice was saying yesterday. He is playing down the idea that climate change is man-made, essentially suggesting it is garbage. I mean, that's a pretty unfashionable viewpoint these days, and it's almost sort of buying into a conspiracy that all the academic reports out there and articles in journals and all the university departments doing research are all in on some kind of secret plot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably reasonable to say that there has been a lot of hyping of this. But the thing that concerns me about this, I mean, this has come from, he said this yesterday, and he's been hit fairly hard by certain sectors of the media about it. And you get this sort of narrative policing. There are some views that you just must not air. And, this is not just, climate change. It's stuff like the rape gangs and the COVID jabs. You're just not allowed to question it. And if you do, then you're a conspiracy theorist or evil or in the pay of some dreadful industry. And this has to stop. This is really causing terrible, terrible issues for our society.
Because this is something that I don't know where I stand on this, quite frankly. I'm going to put myself as an agnostic. I've seen that brilliant documentary by Martin Durkin, which actually was challenged by various scientists, and there had to be corrections issued. But it did raise questions about the impact of man-made, the man-made impact on climate change, and sort of, looking at the Earth's climate over a sustained period of time. It has had massive fluctuations. But then on the other side, I sort of think, well, look, there are so many departments now and scientists, whether they be geologists or meteorologists or biologists, who are all sort of going out there and using scientific equipment and spending a lot of money on getting empirical data, who are saying, no, there is something to see here. And that's the circle I can't square when people turn around and say, no, it's a load of garbage.
Yeah, I mean, you are probably in quite a sensible position here. There are scientists out there collecting data, and yes, it does look like the world is warming. But on the other side of that, you can say, well, yes, it's warmed in the past as well. And they say the warming is unprecedented, and I don't think that's true. There was a period hundreds of thousands of years ago called the Younger Dryas, when they think it probably warmed by between 4 and 10 degrees in various places around the world in the space of a few decades, and much faster than with the warming we've seen today. So I think there are lots of arguments to be had here, and this comes back to the narrative policing point, doesn't it? In science, the narrative is being policed. People who sort of go and question the narrative, they get into terrible trouble. They are silenced, they have their funding taken away. And so, we're not hearing the whole story. And that is what our society has to correct. This is the poison. Really,
and it's surely, it's important to understand the full story if we're going to know how best to tackle whatever might be going on. It's interesting, as she puts a grape in her mouth. I was, when reading up about this and the sort of climactical changes that have happened in the world over the course of various centuries, I found out that in the sort of Renaissance period, there were vineyards all around London. So warm was it back then. I mean, the whole point of prison, is it not, is to be a correctional institute, to make sure that people who go in there are people who have to be removed from society because either they've broken the civic contract with some sort of grey-collar crime, or they pose a direct risk to society. And what's supposed to happen is people are supposed to go to prison to face justice, but also to leave no longer posing that threat. And yet, with the government's justice reforms, sentencing reforms, which essentially seems to be allowing anybody out willy-nilly, regardless of the crime they have committed, without seemingly much thought to whether or not they have been rehabilitated, police are now warning that there is likely to be a surge in crime. Well, who would have thunk it? Who would have thought that people released from prison early might go back to committing crimes? Let's speak now to David Shipley, former prisoner and writer of Justice Issues. I mean, let's look at this. 6% crime rise is what police chiefs are saying about measures proposed under the sentencing bill intended to ease overcrowding in prisons. I don't know anything about anything when it comes to the statistics of recidivism, but I would imagine that could be an underestimate.
It might well be. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense, though. If we release a lot of people from prison or don't imprison in the first place, and those people are criminals, and then we don't do anything out in the community to stop them offending, of course crime's going to go up. If a prolific shoplifter is in prison, he can't shoplift. If we leave him out, he can. So it's absolutely to be expected that if stuff isn't done in the community, we are going to see crime going up.
I mean, these people, when they leave prison, a lot of them end up reacquainting themselves with their old groups, their old sort of, cults of criminality, if you will. What I don't understand is I have heard previous governments plan that they're going to create supermax prisons, 10 new prisons. During COVID, we were building Nightingale hospitals, Nightingale courts. Why? When the situation of prison overcrowding has been hanging like the sword of Damocles over the justice system for so long, forcing a lot of magistrates and judges to not give out custodial sentences or give much reduced ones, now leading to people who frankly should have no right to get back into society, freedom to go around and commit crimes again. Where are these prisons?
Well, we learned actually in August that the prison building programme is now considered to be unachievable. That was the verdict of the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, which is a big government body that oversees this stuff. Basically, one of the big prison building contractors collapsed in August of last year, September of last year, sorry, and now no one really thinks the prison building programme is achievable, which means, by the way, that on the forecast growth in prison population, the prisons will be full again before the next general election. So the party in power, Labour, are going to have to do something about that. And I just don't, I mean, if they have to consider further early releases or be releasing people at 25% of the way through their sentence or something like that, it seems like no one will accept that. So it's going to be a disaster.
It is going to be a disaster. The Justice Secretary, David Lammy, I mean, perhaps actually, I'm no fan of David Lammy, but the fact that these people have been released from prison early isn't necessarily his direct fault. It seems to me like Wandsworth Prison need to very much get their act together. But he should at least deserve to get it in the neck for failing to be honest in Parliament when asked whether he knew about yet another prisoner having gone missing.
Yeah, I don't think it's particularly David Lammy's fault. I think it's actually the fault of the prison service managers and the senior civil servants who've mismanaged this system for a decade or more. But yes, he was not clear in front of Parliament. He could have given some disclosure. He could have said, there is actually someone we're looking for at the moment. I can't give all the details, but I will update the House as soon as I can. And he could have been honest about it, but he chose not to. And then this morning, he sent out his junior minister on the airwaves to defend the fact that he went suit shopping yesterday morning when he knew there were two prisoners on the run. And then last night, from his Twitter account, I saw he posted this tweet. And I appreciate he's very proud of this, saying that he was very proud to be the first black man to appear in the prime ministerial role of Prime Minister's Questions. But this is on a day where he's lost two prisoners who are still at large. So it just seemed a very weird thing to send out, to be celebrating this disastrous PMQs and the fact that, the prison system is in chaos.
No, frankly, if you have to sort of keep going back to the colour of your skin to be your sort of best defining feature, then you're clearly not doing a very good job in your role. He's the man who should be sanctioned himself. He does, of course, run the programme called Political Asylum. This is Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan. Hello, Kev.
Hello, Alex. Couple of points. You're not saving the West. Harry Cole is saving the West.
Oh, yeah, true. He nicked that branding, and good it is as well.
And also, you say that, we're like good Samaritans. I'm not good. I'm a bad Samaritan.
Oh no, actually that is very true. Kevin is a sort of cut and dry misanthrope, whereas despite, do you know, I was speaking to someone the other day, right, and they were saying, oh, you know, I think you're really scary. I think a lot of people are really scared of you. You come across as sort of like, you know, really harsh and I'm like, me? Really? I don't think I do. I think I'm sort of like, I'm like one of the kindest, most loving human beings on the planet.
I agree with that, Alex. People say that about me, that they're scared of me as well. But I always say that my dark heart is in the right place.
No, you are scary, Kev. That is a difference between us. When we first started working together, I was terrified of you. I remember, like, I actually went and bought you a bottle of red wine because it was like throwing a sort of bone into the lion's cage.
That would always work. That would always work. Just get me a bottle of booze and I'll be your friend for life.
Oh, I do love you. Now I know who you are and I've realised your bark is worse than your bite. You don't really have a bite at all. Now, I want to talk about a woman who she hadn't really played much of a part in my life. I sort of knew her face and knew of her being until she brought out the face of crime, which sort of went, I'm going to take off my glasses, sort of went a bit like this.
Yeah, that's good, wasn't it?
Yeah, I love it. Let's actually look at the clip because my impression of Martine Croxall probably wasn't that good. But this is the BBC newsreader who wasn't particularly happy with what was on her autocue.
London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has released research which says that nearly 600 heat-related deaths are expected in the UK. Malcolm Mystery, who is involved in the research, says that the aged, pregnant people, women, and those with pre-existing health conditions need to take precautions.
I love it. Just a little raise of the eyebrow, the slight widening of the eyes, and we read everything. We knew what she meant, and we were cheering her from the sidelines. Sadly, though, 20 people, Kev, weren't. 20 people decided to report this to Ofcom. The BBC have gone, yeah, no, she shouldn't have done that. That's disgusting. That was my impression of you.
Yeah. Well, look, here's the deal with her. I never really liked Martine Croxall much because she previously got in trouble for when Boris Johnson was defenestrated from the Premiership after Partygate. She literally sort of celebrated while reading the news. She went, yeah, like that, and got into big trouble for that because that is hardly impartial, is it? And she's a well-known sort of left-wing union firebrand. So she's not my type of person, but suddenly she's my favorite person on TV. Good for her. What is quite clear about Martine is she's a feminist. You know, she believes in women's rights, and this kind of nonsense, this sexist nonsense, calling women who are carrying children pregnant people is sexist. It demeans women. They're not pregnant people. As Martine said, they are women. And as you also said earlier, we had hoped that all this kind of claptrap was in the past, but it very much isn't. My good friend Piers Morgan has just published a book. I went to the launch called Woke is Dead. If only, Piers, if only 2 weeks ago, I'm sure you covered the story as well, Alex. I did the story of how the National Trust, in all of its men's loos, has installed tampon machines with vegan tampons in them. Woke is dead. Woke is dead. My backside woke is dead. Woke is oppressing us everywhere. Martine made a stand there, and good for her. And to hell with those 20 people who complained, and seriously to hell with the BBC for upholding that complaint. That complaint is an affront to common sense.
I want to know what a vegan tampon is, and if I want to know what the meaty version of a tampon might be. If there was specific vegan, I don't know that.
Yes, that confused me as well. Yeah, I do agree.
Oh, but you know, I want to go back to the panorama thing because this should have shaken the BBC to the core. This should have been mega news because this is fraud. Actually, this is not just an accident. This isn't just an oversight. This isn't just, oh, well, we knew that kid was related to someone, but we didn't really realise it was someone else. This is a production team and the editor of that programme saying, sit down, put these clips together. We need to make this look like he is inciting insurrection. They went for the doom music, the grey filter, the dramatisation, the lot of it. This wasn't reporting the news. This was inventing it. And to do that, to so flagrantly libel and lie about the leader of the free world is astonishing. And yet we've spoken about it a lot. The BBC said, we don't comment on leaks, as if they're some sort of two-bit political party. But this should have been massive.
I think it still is. It is massive. I understand from my friends in America that Donald Trump is preparing to sue the British state broadcaster.
Oh, he is.
Which will be one hell of an event. Don't forget, he's got form of this. He does not allow media outlets, broadcasters, to twist the truth about him. Very recently, or not so long ago, he sued CBS Television, or rather their parent company, Paramount, because funny enough, the American equivalent to Panorama, a show called 60 Minutes, mangled and spliced and edited Kamala Harris talking about him, talking with him, to make it look as if she was fluent and brilliant and he wasn't. And so the truth was twisted. He sued. He just got $16 million.
Yeah.
From Paramount, from CBS. He will sue the BBC, and that will be quite an event, and the BBC deserve it. A lot of people saying to me, oh yeah, well the problem with that is the BBC will not have to give him millions of pounds, and we, the licence fee payers, will have to foot the bill. Well, yes, that's not good, but I'm prepared to foot the bill. I hope to high heaven he sues the BBC, because they deserve it, and they must not be allowed to carry on trying to sweep this under the carpet. No, we don't comment about it. You've got to comment about it, because after all the scandals that the Keystone Cop Director General, Tim Davie, has presided over, you know, the Gary Lineker tweets, Hugh Edwards, the paedophile newsreader, of course, Bob Villan, death of the IDF at Glastonbury, and now the Gaza documentary, failing to mention that the narrator was the son of a Hamas government official, and now this is the worst of the lot.
Yeah.
Tim Davie has got to go, and so has the head of news there, Deborah Turness. Deborah Turness, by the way, gets £431,000 a year, and Tim Davie gets £570,000 a year. So between the two of them, they're earning £1 million a year of our money. They're not fit to run a bath, those two. They've got to go. Accountability. We've got to bring accountability back into this country. Those two people, those two executives at the BBC, have screwed things up in spades for years. Yeah. They've got to go.
No, I agree. Well, let's just watch it with enthusiasm, shall we? Because it's cut and dry. Mind the pun there, but it is cut and dry that they fiddled the footage. Last night didn't amount to the horrors that I thought it had the potential to amount to. I thank you, God, for that. But it's still left a very, very dark shadow, hasn't it, over the state of Britain today?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, the organisers in their classic hyperbolic way were saying, oh, there'll be 300,000 people there. We're going to bring Birmingham to a standstill. I think the number was probably, if you were being generous, around about 1,000. It was maybe less than that, but it was still, these were still very unpleasant scenes. This was, in effect, this is Aston, where Aston Villa is, in the heart of Birmingham, Britain's second city. Aston has a 70% Muslim population. In itself, there's nothing wrong with that. We have a multicultural society. You're going to have urban areas where certain sections of our community will congregate. People tend to congregate together. In itself, I have no objections to that. What I have a massive objection to, and that we should all object to, is sections of those people who live in Aston essentially declaring this is an Islamic territory. Yeah. Jews are not allowed in. That's what this was all about. Of course, the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were banned from the match. In itself, absolutely disgraceful. And by the way, Keir Starmer said the right thing at first. He said, this is a wrong decision. These people should be allowed to watch their football team. And then just sort of faded away. Just let it go.
Right.
So what we had here was a police force saying, oh, we can't guarantee the safety of these Jewish fans, therefore we say they can't come to the match. If it was Palestine United or Gaza Albion, I guarantee you they would have been allowed to attend the match. If it was Man United fans or Millwall fans, they would have been allowed to attend the match. These fans from Maccabi Tel Aviv were not allowed to attend that match, in my view, specifically because they're Jewish and this is an Islamic area. That's a disgrace.
One thing that astonishes me is, you know, we saw this, didn't we, with the Manchester airport thugs, when a bit of footage was circulating that made it look like armed police at the airport had been a little bit too excitable and overbearing in apprehending two people. When we then realised the context of what was going on, we realised that these were two highly dangerous, violent thugs who had broken a policewoman's nose, and a police officer was just trying to get them under control because he had a firearm on him. And at the initial outbreak of all of that hoo-ha, you had a solicitor representing these two people.
Our friend.
And our mate. And he was saying, come on, everybody, we need to protest, we need to get justice, let's all assemble outside Manchester police station. I was blessed with his company just yesterday. Have a little watch, Kev.
Yeah.
You're now saying that Israelis aren't allowed to come to Birmingham. What gives you the right to decide that?
The intelligence received by them from the Dutch authorities was that the public of Birmingham won't be safe from these Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, not the other way around.
I know full well what's happened in Amsterdam when Maccabi Tel Aviv went to play there, and there was a Jew hunt going on.
Go on to the Dutch police website, you'll get a totally different picture. You're looking at it Israeli eyes.
Let's say that is true. Let's say that is true, and we're going to look at...
You're talking over me. Alex, you're looking at things from the eyes of your puppet masters. That's the problem.
Oh, my puppet masters! I love that.
There you go, Alex, interviewing Jakub 2 days after I did. But better late than never, eh?
Hold on, can I just say, talk about better late than never. I've already had 2 legal letters in the post from that man. Have you had one of them yet?
Have you?
Yeah.
All right, okay.
All from his sort of Morris Green solicitors, whatever it's called. No, I got in there well early, son.
As you said, though, seriously, so we've both interviewed him. We've both got a flavour of what kind of guy he is. Hiding behind, these pro-Palestine marchers last night, Jakub including, were saying, oh, well, what we're worried about is football hooliganism. No, you're not. No, you're not. And by the way, that really, really annoys me. All of the politicians, the local MP as well, who's the local MP for Perry Barr and also the MP for Gaza, saying, oh, well, it's all about football hooliganism. And when, what's his name? The local MP is called
Ayub Khan.
Ayub Khan. When he got together that petition to stop the fans coming, the Israeli fans coming, guess who else was at the top of the petition? It was him and Jeremy Corbyn, the MP for Islington North, an MP who in his vastly long 500-year Westminster career has never once expressed an interest in football hooliganism. Suddenly, he's really riled up. The danger here for football hooliganism is too extreme, and therefore we must stop these fans coming. This is anti-Semitism. This is Jew hatred. It is obvious, and the authorities and West Midlands Police should never have enshrined this. They should
what
never
I don't understand is it's always... To me, it seems that the powers that be, the establishments, are deeply frightened of upsetting one particular community. They don't seem to sort of, maybe they don't have demands levelled at them from the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the Buddhist community, the Christians, whatever else it might be. But when it comes to very loud, vocal people from the Muslim community making demands every single time the authorities crumble. It's what led to the ridiculous protest yesterday. The football match should have just been cancelled, quite frankly. So much for give racism.
I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree with that at all.
Well, it should have gone ahead with the fans. No, I know. But if they were going to say we can't run it because the fans won't be safe here...
In that case, yes, I do agree with that.
Yeah, then give racism the red card.
Why was gone ahead, Alex, like any other...
Well, it should have done. No, that should have been... No, but if it were true that the fans weren't safe, and quite frankly, I can see many reasons why that would be the case following what happened in Amsterdam, then actually there should have been show racism the red card, which includes anti-Semitism. But this
Can I just interrupt for a second? This Amsterdam business, let's get that right. They keep citing Amsterdam, that when the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans went to Amsterdam, they caused all merry hell and a massive riot. Well, look, the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are not exactly the finest fans in the world. But then again, lots of football clubs in England have notorious fans. When they went to Amsterdam, yes, there was trouble, but they were set upon. Everywhere the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans go, they are set upon by pro-Palestine protesters. Therefore, trouble does go with them, but they don't necessarily start this trouble. There's a lot of evidence that in Amsterdam they didn't start it, they were just set upon. So we need to get that.
No, I agree. No,
right.
I totally agree. But this whole sort of not being able to show any sort of backbone for fear of offending particular people is also what lies beneath one of the greatest, most disgusting, disturbing, harrowing abrogations of duty ever by those people in positions of power. We are, of course, talking about the rape gangs. And today, front page of the Express, Nigel Farage saying he's had enough of the whitewash and the cover-up of the national inquiry that the Labour Party didn't want to happen and are doing all they can to sort of water down, dilute, distract, kibosh, and wants to call for a parliamentary probe, which would force people under oath to have to come and give evidence. But again, it always comes down to the same small subset of people who, for whatever reason, terrorise and instill the fear of God into exactly sort of people who should be standing up against them and saying, no, 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 you integrate, you play by the same rule book, or we're going to have to deal with you differently.
Well, listen, you're just showing footage of Nigel Farage with Ellie Reynolds, one of the great rape gang victims, next to him. And she's, I think, going to be a spokesman for reform, or a spokesperson for reform about the sexual abuse, child sexual abuse. Ellie and one of her fellow rape gang victims, Fiona, my producer Samara Gill, who you know, and I went out drinking with them on Monday. Very, very nice girls, and good fun girls as well. But they sum up the frustration not only of the victims but also of the nation. There are 200. They estimate there are 250,000 victims of these rape gangs. And don't forget, it is still going on, including in London, where Sadiq Khan says it isn't going on. They deserve justice. The nation deserves justice. But the girls, what they're saying to us is they both resigned from the alleged national inquiry because Labour, the authorities, the government are trying to Jess Phillips, the alleged safeguarding minister, are trying to widen the remit of this inquiry so that the finger of blame is not pointed at the perpetrators, as in the rape gangs, most of whom were Muslim men of Pakistani heritage. The government wants to avoid citing these Muslims because, yet again, same as they were lackadaisical about last night and the Muslim protesters and let it go ahead, same as they didn't do anything about the wrong ban of the Israeli fans, it's because they cravenly pursue the Muslim vote. The Labour's desire for the Muslim vote is turning this country into a very, very corrupt nation.
I've got some good news for you that's just breaking, Kev. You know that at the moment it seems prisons around the country seem to be losing sex offenders left, right and centre. The Algerian migrant who was wrongly released, who was a convicted sex offender, well, he has now apparently been rearrested. He has been found. The other guy who was accidentally let out of Wandsworth Prison, the fraudster, actually handed himself in. I wasn't worried about a bit of grey-collar crime. You know, what was he going to do? Like break into his local council and start defrauding the accounts department? This man on the loose, I was quite concerned about, but thankfully he has been tracked down. But what the hell is going on? Everything about justice in this country is falling apart. And if you do not have a functioning justice system, whether it's two-tier police, whether it's lackadaisical police, whether it's leftist judges making decisions that frankly make absolutely no sense and aren't in the general public's interest, then you don't have a civilised society.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, as things stand, after David Lammy's lamentable performance in the House of Commons 2 days ago. We don't have a functioning democracy. I think that the House, the fact that James Cartledge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, very calmly asked him 5 times, the essential question was, is there another asylum seeker sex offender on the loose having been released by mistake? I mean, he kept saying, can you assure us that none of this has happened again? We know that Lammy knew full well it had happened. 5 times he refused to answer. What is the point of Parliament if they're going to obfuscate with the truth like that? I think that we need to change the rules of the House of Commons, and that old Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, needs to be able to demand
that
under the new rules that question is answered. They play politics as if they're giving an interview to us or the BBC or ITV. No. This is the House of Commons. Yeah. And when he essentially hid the truth from the Commons, David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, he hid the truth from the people, because these are the representatives of the people. And that is not acceptable. That is not democracy. And that joke, that farce that we saw the other day by that ludicrous oaf David Lammy, must never be allowed to happen again. We've got to change the rules.
I totally agree. Evasion is, of course, deception. Well, I was very much full of doom and gloom at the prospect of what might unfold last night as the Aston Villa versus Maccabi Tel Aviv match got underway with all of those protests. Now, I am relieved to say that despite the ugliness of the optics, and it still leaves a sort of ominous portent in my heart about the fact that essentially a noisy rabble of anti-Semites were trying to impose apartheid in Birmingham. In fact, frankly, they were successful, weren't they, given that Israeli fans were not allowed in, and they managed to flood the city with posters saying things like boot Zionists out. I mean, it's really not good, is it? That little rabble-rouser, Mr. Ahmed Yaqub, didn't get the 300,000 protesters from across the country that he had hoped to achieve. And yet, at the very least, it was a huge waste of police time. And it goes to show that, frankly, the authorities are just not standing up to this blight. Let's speak now to Peter Blexley, former Met Police detective. Peter, I am, like I said, relieved. There were still 11 arrests. It's not really detailed who they were, but we know that people were taken into custody for a variety of offences, including trying to throw fireworks into the ground, possessing Class B drugs and shouting racist abuse. But other than the sort of hooliganism, let's say, that people were nicked for me, the thing that was the most ghoulish was all of those men going out at night with balaclavas and putting messages up that, read one way, just saying, wow, we don't want people who support Israel in this horrible war, genocide, but really, the underlying message was, we don't want Jews here.
The football results are in. Anti-Semitic hate mob 1, tolerance and democracy 0. Welcome to Britain in 2025. But this whole scenario tells you the truth about policing and anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian, call them what you want, mobsters in the UK. They are simply now too big to police, so they have to be placated. This is why Muslim Pakistani rape gangs were not properly investigated in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in Oldham, in Telford. They're too big. There's too many of them, and the police are scared.
I mean, that in itself is harrowing. Because if you're saying they're too big now, one thing is for certain, those communities are only going to get larger. And clearly there are people within that community who have the audacity to believe that they now run Birmingham, that it is theirs, that our second city is now under their control. And you kind of have to ask yourself, what happens next? Because when this all began with Ayub Khan, the pro-Gaza MP, saying that he didn't want the fans coming over because apparently they're all hooligans and they would endanger the local community, which we all know is absolute hogwash. It then became, well, we don't want the team coming. It then became, we don't want Israel in FIFA. It then became, we don't want Israel in sport at all. And this all sort of accelerated in a matter of weeks because We said yes to their first demand. And you have to look at what went on. No one was told you can't put this up, you can't have these protests, take down those flags, take down those signs, go home, you don't run Birmingham. And so as far as I can tell, they're going to be emboldened. And I wonder, Peter, how long we have to wait until certain parts of Birmingham have their own, frankly, Islamic Guard who decide the rules that happen within what they demand as their territory.
It's gone way beyond that. It's not just people in the community. These people, some of them, are in Parliament. Yes, that's how far it's gone. And now, of course, because their demand to not have any away supporters was met, in essence, in other words, the police caved in, just like they have almost caved in to the protesters in London with their anti-Semitic chanting and their slogans and their banners and the such like. All this appeasement is doing is empowering this mob. The police they won't admit it to you and I and publicly, but clearly they think it's too big to police. So I'll use the word again, they placate, they appease, because they're too scared of a head-to-head clash, which I appreciate would be ugly and is probably better to avoid, but nonetheless, they're too big, there's too many of them, the police can't cope, and they've rolled over.
What do you make of this other story in the Telegraph today? 90 violent or sex offenders have been mistakenly released from prison in the last year. That's almost 2 a week being let back out into society, who frankly should be kept locked up. I mean, as a former police detective, that must chill you to the bone, because the police have to jump through so many hurdles in order to make sure they secure a prosecution with all the right evidence and all the rest of it. That after all of that effort, if these people are just sort of let out because the prison officers can't seem to do their job, it's chilling.
If I had spent time dealing with a victim, dealing with witnesses, liaising with scenes of crime to get any forensics, putting all the evidential package together, sending it off to the CPS, ensuring that charges were brought forward, getting that person to court, seeing them convicted, only for them then to be mistakenly released from prison, I would be one very grumpy detective. Moreover, it's putting the public at risk. Clearly, the whole criminal justice system is in an absolute state of flux, and we need to get a grip. Let's stop putting idiots in charge. Let's put people in charge who are capable, who are committed, who know what they're doing, who have some experience, who know how to turn around an organisation of whatever size and shape it is. Not so many years ago, in fact, in 2024, Rolls-Royce turned around its complete fortunes because it was focused. It had the right people. It had a strategy. And Rolls-Royce is a business with a turnaround of about £18 billion a year. The Home Office has a budget of £20 billion a year. So not that far away from the size of turnover that Rolls-Royce enjoys. If we had the right, capable, clever, intellectual, committed people in charge who actually knew what they were doing, there is no reason why the criminal justice system could not be turned around in a similar kind of time frame.
No, I totally agree, and I think the first thing they need to do is abandon any form of wokery.